We also have seen some information about problems in Newark, New Jersey, and some other places. And so Councilmember Adams and other council members have been pressuring us to bring information to you about what is really going on with the water systems, and specifically how are we different than these other communities. And so we've got information prepared for you. It gives you a little history of the program and also talks about our system.
Thank you. Mr. Argrove.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and council members. Thank you for having me tonight. I've got 20 slides here. I'll be as brief as I can. Please ask questions along the way if you'd like to. Mission statement of Utilities Division: treat and distribute water and collect and treat wastewater in compliance with all the rules and maintain the lowest cost of any major system in North Carolina. We are very competitive on the rates, and we do meet our regulations. Just a reminder that utilities involves water treatment, water distribution, wastewater treatment and collection, and also solid waste disposal was under our umbrella. Our water system dates back to the 1780s. Certainly wasn't a city-county utility division then, but water was piped into the Sister's Kitchen in Old Salem in 1789, I believe. And then the sewer system dates back to the Winston Township, where a line was laid along the Tar Branch down to a community septic tank. Just a reminder that the utilities is under a city-county agency with the utility commission formed between the merger of the city-county systems in 1976, and it is an enterprise fund not supported by tax dollars. The map to the right you see there is an outline of the service district. The line in blue is the water system, which is the outer line, and then the line in green is the sewer system coverage of the county. This is a map of the water system showing our various tanks and plants and some major lines that run between those. Again, our major sources are the Yadkin River and Salem Lake, and we have a couple of intakes on the river and one on Salem Lake.
Is that about 75-25 or 80-20?
It's about 80-20. Just an overview. Again, our source waters, Yadkin River, Salem Lake. Winston-Salem also, through a contract with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in 1959, has access to the water in Kerscott Reservoir should we ever need it. We really have not ever needed it, but we have tested it during drought conditions. It takes about 36 hours for water to be released from the reservoir and make it to our intake. So that's a good benefit that most other localities do not have. We have 3 water treatment plants, capacity of 91 million gallons per day. In 15, our demand was 36 million. We treated about 13.7 billion gallons in fiscal year 15. Our average cost of treatment was $723 per million gallons, and our O&M budget for water treatment was $9.3 million. 3 plants, just go through quickly the pictures, and the Pascal 8W Swan plant out on the northwest side of the county, 25 million gallon a day. It's a conventional treatment plant, which all of our plants are conventional treatment, and that was completed in 2004. The Nielsen plant's our largest plant at 48 million gallons a day, again, conventional treatment plant. It's in the Clemens area. It receives water directly from the river.
Mr. Argrove, what do you mean by conventional treatment?
I'll explain that.
Okay, thank you.
And then the Thomas plant's our newest plant, although it's on the oldest site that we have. It's over off Martin Luther King, just south of Winston-Salem State University. The existing plant was decommissioned and demolished in 2008, and we rebuilt a new plant on top of it, that site, in 2011. It's 18 million gallons, again, conventional treatment. There is a pipeline that supplies the Thomas plant with river water, as well as it draws water directly from the lake. So it has a dual source. And that pipeline was built in the late 40s as the first tap of the river for our system. This is the treatment process. And when I say conventional treatment, is we don't have to do anything exotic to remove the particles and sediment in the water. The Yadkin River looks muddy. It is muddy. But once you take that clay and silt and colloidal material out of the water through conventional means, meaning pH adjustment and alum, it clears it up very nicely for us. It doesn't have a heavy organic load, so we don't have to do any extra treatment for disinfection byproducts, meaning when we add chlorine, if there's organic content in the water, you have a limit on how much byproducts are produced from the plant. We don't have to, we meet those regulations through conventional treatment and chlorine addition, where everywhere east of Winston-Salem has to add ammonia to their system and have to take extra steps throughout the year to keep their system in control.
Could you walk through what each one of these little steps are real quick?
Sure. This is basically showing you the intake of source water through a pump station, which we have on the river sites that we have. We have 2 of those. It then is pumped to the plant where we feed some pre-addition chemicals. It's a pH control. Here it's lime. We feed caustic soda. And we feed alum, which is aluminum sulfate. That's a coagulant, just kind of like your blood coagulates. Alum coagulates the clay particles in the water. We mix that up, and you go through a process of coagulation and flocculation. We're basically trying to make the particles sticky, and then they stick together as the more you mix them, and then it goes into sedimentation. The particles, as they stick together, they start to settle because they become heavy. And then you get a clear layer that's produced that goes on top of your filters, which are shown here. And the filtration process is kind of like the percolation process of the Earth's surface, where water filters down through the soil, the clay, the silt, the rock layer, and you have an aquifer under there. That's how the filtration process works here. We then add chlorine to the water so that we can disinfect the water, and we keep it housed in some storage on site for a period of time to make sure that chlorine has contact time with the water to make sure there's no bacteria in the water, and then it's pumped out into the system. The other thing that's important and related to the news lately is we feed zinc orthophosphate as a corrosion control inhibitor. This part and these part in the intake, the source water, are the things that differentiate our system from the situation in Flint. They change sources for financial reasons and maybe some pressure from where they were drawing their source water, and they weren't required by the regulatory body, either the state or the EPA, to my understanding, to perform a corrosion control study. And unfortunately, the water that they treated was leaching lead and other components out of the plumbing and piping system in the city. And unfortunately for the customers, they are experiencing some severe problems based upon that.
Just one moment. Mr. Clark?
Yeah. It's my understanding older homes, and this town certainly has older homes, as a lot of towns do, maybe not California or somewhere here. And so we know that our water is going to come in contact with lead pipes or lead solder. And therefore, we know we got to put the zinc orthophosphate in appropriately.
Correct.
Isn't that a no-brainer? Shouldn't a town know, and I'll pick on Flint, I guess, they certainly have older houses. They certainly know that there's lead solder, lead pipes out there. Why would this not be a no-brainer to check the, and I'm assuming that's a pH type control or whatever you're doing?
It's a chemical addition as well as pH, because it only works in a certain pH range.
Okay.
And
so they know they got lead pipes and lead solder down line. It seems like to me it's a no-brainer that they know they've got to adjust their water accordingly. Your thoughts? From
the treatment employees in the town, I think it is a no-brainer. From what I understand, in Michigan, when cities are in financial trouble, they can appoint emergency managers who have more authority than even the elected body. And so it sounds to me like there was a financial decision made about we can pay less to get the water, and the voice of the treatment operators weren't heard.
Is it a federal or state regulation that you have to sample that water and put the zinc off? orthophosphate in accordingly. Is that an EPA or?
That's an EPA. A corrosion control study is required by the lead and copper rule from 1991. So it's a federal requirement.
Federal requirement. Okay, thank you.
And the, do you happen to know whether Flint did add the corrosion control element, or?
I think after a period of many months, they have finally started adding chemical for corrosion control.
So it wasn't a matter of.
And they also switched back to their original source.
Sure. But in the case of Flint, it wasn't a matter of they just weren't calculating how much to add, right? They weren't adding any at all.
They didn't add any at all.
And as I understand it, the base problem was they had a more corrosive water supply coming in.
Correct.
Was that just the pH, or was there something else?
Yeah, I've read various articles, but it sounds to me like the source water closest to them had a lot of industrial discharges that had a lot of chlorides in the water. You can think about salt water and the corrosivity of salt water. It wasn't to that degree, but it was about 12 times more corrosive than the Lake Huron water they were receiving.
Okay, thank you. Please go.
Sure. Getting into the lead and copper rule, again, promulgated in 1991. The Utilities Division installed and maintained corrosion control since 1992. We did the study work and understood what water quality parameters were important to monitor. We did sampling in 1993 in targeted houses according to the rule. The EPA rules set up some Tier 1, 2, and 3 target homes. These are homes that were built after 1982 that had lead service lines or lead soldered piping. The idea was that newer homes, the lead and solder was more free to be leached from the water system if it was corrosive, and so they targeted homes that had recently been built at the time. The lead, I'll get to that later, but our initial sampling in 93, our 90 percentile, which is where you're measured at if you meet the rule or not, was less than 10 parts per billion. The action level is 15 parts per billion. If you exceed that action level, you have to take extra steps on corrosion control prevention and that kind of thing. There's also a copper component. We were well below that action level of 1.3 parts per million or 1,300 parts per billion. We've gone through a series of years of sampling. We went from twice a year down to once a year, down to once every 3 years. So our last sampling event was 2013. All samples were below detection level, meaning they were less than 3 parts per billion in our system, the 90th percentile level.
So all the samples were below?
The 90th percentile. I'm not saying, maybe I said all, but I think all the 90%, out of 100 samples, 90 of them were less than detection limits, less than 3 parts per billion.
Were there any samples that hit the action?
There were not any above 15, no, sir.
Can you give us, by comparison, what kinds of values were they measuring in the Flint water before it was switched back?
I've heard values that are outrageous, like 15,000 parts per billion.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Our next sampling event's this summer. The rule requires you to do it during the highest temperature. That way the water's obviously, the kinetics are more active, so it's more aggressive during those periods of time. And then there's some cost. We spend about $366,000 a year adjusting pH and adding our corrosion control inhibitor.
When you sample, do you sample in the house or at the street? Where you
It's in the house. This rule is the only rule the EPA has promulgated that regulates us at the customer's tap. Everything else,
we don't own the pipe.
we don't own the plumbing, but we're regulated by what's in the customer's tap.
And in theory, even if they may have lead pipes or lead solder, because we're putting in the
Zinc ortho.
zinc orthophosphate, then it should take care of it. It's not like it did. I mean, I'm amazed at the 90th percentile, you were still getting no detection.
Correct. Yeah, it passivates the system. That's why, we employed that treatment during 1992, and then we sampled in 1993 to let it passivate the system, basically coat the lines in the plumbing systems.
So you're testing at the end user site?
End
Is that right?
users.
How do you choose the end user?
Again, it was based on the tier, based upon when the house was built, and were they served by a lead service line, or did they have lead solder in the copper piping?
So I guess the question is, do you target residences that are more likely to have it?
All of our samples are from Tier 1 sites.
Okay.
In Tier 1, you mean the ones that are most likely to be vulnerable?
Correct.
And
Correct.
how many do you have?
We have 150 sites.
And what's the geographic distribution?
It's all over the system, city and county. Little bit of more information, things to think about. Lead exposure. If you'll recall, leaded gasoline was banned in 1970s. You know, there was a study done that showed that children that lived near highways had higher exposures to lead in their blood. Lead paint was banned in 1978. The lead solder ban was issued along with the new promulgation of the Safe Drinking Water Act in 1986. Lead in fixtures was banned in 2014. It includes all the appurtenances that we employ in the water system. Our meter and our brass fittings contract, that cost increased about 40% with the no lead ban in 2014. I did check with the Forsyth County Health Department. They have a program monitoring lead in blood levels of children, have had it for years. The trends they sent me over the last 10 years have been on a downward slope, and folks that are children that they would consider to be poisoned by lead, there's like maybe one detect a year now, and obviously it's not from the water system. Just jumping ahead, the system is made up of tanks and pump stations. Tanks, if you'll just envision why they're there, they serve three purposes: fire protection, system pressure, and storage. All the elevated tanks, the water sitting up there applies pressure to the system, and then if there's a ground storage tank, we have a pump station associated with that. Utilities, construction, and maintenance, the other side of the water system. They're the folks that make the repairs to the pipes and make sure that flushing is completed and that kind of thing. They maintain about 2,245 miles of pipe, valves, hydrants, connections. They extend mains, they install connections, they flush hydrants, they provide emergency response. If you recall, February 15, last year was not very kind to us. Let me back up. I had some cool videos here. There it goes. Will it work? No. Oh, well. Just showing you how the water, I mean, it was a significant amount of water. We shut down 52 on a Saturday and I-40 on a Sunday. So those guys, about 30 responders, worked really hard over that weekend to get us back in shape and get the roads back open.
If something like that happens, can you reroute so that folks still have water?
Yes, sir. We have a lot of redundancy on the Cassell Street. It took us a few days to get some valves, valving appropriately, especially for the ABC board offices over there. But, yeah, we got them back in water very quickly.
Let's be sure ABC does it. Yeah, I hate for them not to have any water.
The meter shop, they are the guys out reading meters and maintaining the residential and commercial meters in our system. And those size ranges are from 5/8 to 10-inch meters. And there's a pictorial of kind of how that piping and network flows between the main and the residents. And then we have a technical services group. They get involved in backflow prevention that protects the public system from any backflows from the private side, as well as they have the flushing our system to maintain water age and that kind of thing. They do tank isolation. We just isolated the Wake Forest tank last week. They also do chlorination projects. If a contractor's installing a new main somewhere, they can actually hire the city to come and chlorinate the line. That way we can make sure it's done properly. We always test those lines to make sure they pass disinfection. And then we work off of our mobile work order system through our handheld devices, so we can tell what assets are in the ground and what valves to operate when we're out in the system. So that's it as far as a quick nutshell version of the water system. Be glad to answer any other questions.
I have one question and one comment. First off, I'd appreciate a copy of this.
Certainly.
Second comment, I want to thank you folks for doing your job right, quietly, and with no fanfare.
Yeah.
Two questions. One, you mentioned that folks east of us have to do something else. I'd be curious your comments there. And number two, and I think I know the answer to this, but our capacity is 91 million gallons a day, but we average 39. But it's my understanding we need that capacity because there's certain times of the day when people use it at that rate. So
Right.
To comment on those.
Sure. The folks east of us, including Greensboro and Raleigh and everywhere else east, they actually add ammonia to the water along with the chlorine, so they form something called chloramines. And that compound lasts longer in the water, and it doesn't form the byproducts when their water has more organics in it, naturally occurring organics.
Don't form this at home. Chlorine and ammonia do not form at home.
Yeah.
So
They have to add the ammonia because they have more organics.
they have more organics in the water, and so we're measured. The longer the water's in the system, the more byproducts you produce. And we're now regulated at individual sites around our system. It used to be an average of all the sites, but we have 12 sites that we have to monitor quarterly, and you're monitoring on a running average. And any one that spikes above a certain limit, you have to do public notice and that kind of thing. So a lot of those systems that have the organics
If
add
we're
the chlorine.
recruiting a business that may be going to Raleigh, we can say one difference is our water does not have ammonia.
That's correct.
Okay.
It's not extra treatment for somebody that's going to use the water. People with fish tanks and that kind of thing, they really appreciate, and dialysis units really appreciate us not using ammonia.
And then the capacity issue.
The capacity issue, yes, we have 3 plants, so we got kind of triple redundancy, and then there is a peak factor. Really, it hits us in the summertime. Our historical peak has been about 69 million. But there's a peak factor of about 150% of average day that we see on average over our system.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
As I recall from when I was on the coast, the problem with heavy organics and relying on chlorination exclusively, you produced trichlorides?
Trihalomethanes.
Trihalomethanes, and they have carcinogenic.
Right, exactly.
So, yeah. And is it that adding the ammonia allows you to keep the chlorination down, or is it that the organics react to the ammonia before the?
The chlorine is kind of complexed with the ammonia, and so they don't quite form the compounds that free chlorine does with the naturally occurring organics. You actually feed a higher dose of chlorine than you do with free chlorine.
Interesting. Okay. I'm sorry. Techies. Yes, ma'am.
To Councilmember Clark's comments, I want to again thank you and staff for doing what you do every day for the most important item in our life that we take for granted. We don't know all of the transparency and things that go on behind the scenes, that when we turn that faucet or whatever, that the water is safe and we can drink it, and we can be assured of that. As Mr. Turner, and you know, and Mr. Garrity, and Mr. Best, Councilmember Bessie, when you retired, like Ms. Burke said, you see a lot of television on the spot when things happen. And the first thing I thought about at home watching network news, MSNBC, when the Flint issue jumped, immediately I said there are going to be other issues with other smaller towns who haven't had the resources that cities like we do to be able to be progressive and ahead of it, proactive. So I thought with the conversation, even today, I went to Cook Elementary to volunteer this morning and talked to several classes to tell them what we do with the city. And when I asked them about, do you know about your drinking water, the first thing most of them said, is it like Flint's? You know, I said, no, it's not like Flint. They said, is it safe? I said, yeah, it's safe. It's the city of Winston-Salem. But again, I want to thank you, and not just for this group, but on behalf of the citizens of Winston-Salem. Mr. Garrett, Mr. Turner, and you guys, is there any way we can get this on 13 to run to help re-educate our citizens on not just this, but on the basis? I know I've seen some clips on the utilities on 13, and I thought it was very interesting. But I think if we could add just a couple of things from this presentation, you'd be surprised how many